Good morning. That was an excellent good morning back. Super excited to be able to speak with you guys today. I'm super excited to be able to present on this graduation Sunday. A Sunday where, like Jim said, we honor and we recognize and we celebrate the hard work of our high school and of our college graduates. And I'll be honest, every year it gets harder and harder for me because for the past 4.5 years, I've got to work with this group. I've got to teach their Bible class. And if you look hard, 4 of our 5 seniors are in that photo, if you can spot them. 4.5 years I've got to teach them. And in Bible class, an example today, it was actually brought up by Nash Crane. We had a word of the day. Today's word of the day in Bible class was tacit because he used that word. And I was like, I do not know what that word means. So like Nash brought us a word of the day. Well, my message today also is guided by one word. So graduates, your word for the day is providence. Providence. It's not really a word that we use in Church of Christ circles. It's not really a word that I can say I've heard a sermon about before. But here recently, this word was used. And when I heard this word, I knew that it applied to me. It applied to my family in a situation that we had just gone through. So I looked up a definition. And providence, the protective care of God. When I use that word today, this is the definition I'm using. The protective care of God. I like the example they use. They found their trust in divine providence to be a source of comfort. They found their trust in divine protective care of God to be a source of comfort. And that's the story I want to talk to you about today, because this past March for spring break, my family went on a trip. We went to Pennsylvania, and we got to visit Jen, my wife's family. We got to see her dad. We got to visit her sisters and their families, and we had a great time. And because we were already in Pennsylvania, we decided, well, we're this far, we might as well go to the coast. We might as well go to Washington, D.C., and explore our nation's capital. Eli had never been, and so we thought, he's at a perfect age to go. So we took Beth and Eli, my wife, we're in Washington, D.C. We spent a couple of days, and the weather was perfect. The cherry blossoms were coming out. It was beautiful. But all good things come to an end, and we now are heading home. And so Thursday, we leave D.C., and we have a choice to make. We can go back, and Apple Maps tells us, we can come back, basically the fastest way is the same route we got there. Go up, hit Pennsylvania, go through Ohio, get back home. But it offered us another option, not terribly too much further than our original route, just a tad bit longer. And so, Miles, Providence. We chose to go what we called the scenic way home. We go the longer route. This takes us through Maryland. It takes us through West Virginia and Kentucky. And we're trying to get back home, and my family's had all they can stand. So we spend the night in Lexington, Kentucky, because we still have a ways to get back home. Friday comes around, we wake up, we hit the road, and it's raining. It's raining on us all morning. as I'm honestly I'm not going to lie in church, I'm going to confess, I was speeding in the rain, driving down the interstate, pushing it to get back home. We had a visitation for my aunt that evening, and I wanted to be home. Pushing it. We're now out of Kentucky. We're in Indiana, in the middle of Indiana, to be precise. All of a sudden, as we're driving, our 2013 Kia Optima, which has never given us a lick of problems ever. We're driving down the interstate, and the car stops responding. I'm driving, but I'm pushing the accelerator, and the accelerator acts like it doesn't exist anymore. Speed is decreasing rapidly on the interstate, and I'm looking down like, what is going on? And I see the check engine light. But the check engine light is not just on, it's blinking. For those of you who laughed, you know. A blinking check engine light is worse than a steady check engine light. A blinking check engine light means get help now, get help right now. And I'm like, to Jen, I'm like, the car's not responding. And I'm like, she's like, do we need to pull over? And I'm like, yes, we do. And I'm looking, and it's raining. I'm looking up ahead, and I see an exit sign. Lydia, Providence. Santa Claus, Indiana. And I'm like, well, if we have to make a stop or a detour, doesn't that sound like the best place to have to make an unscheduled stop? We pull off, we exit, we pull into a Wendy's parking lot. And I'm like, what is going on? It will still drive, it just won't let me drive fast, like interstate speeds. It like wants me to go 55 miles an hour or slower. It is trying to kick me back down. And so I'm like, okay, well maybe if I just turn the car off and turn it back on again, it will work. It works with our phones, it works with our computers. Turn it off, turn it back on again. It didn't work. And the check engine light is still blinking as we're sitting in a Wendy's parking lot. And what turns out not to be Santa Claus, Indiana, but Ferdinand, Indiana. And I'm not pronouncing it correctly. It looks like Ferdinand, the bull, but it's not pronounced that way by anyone who lives in this city, and I still don't know how to pronounce it correctly, but that's where we're at. And so, going back to my phone, I'm looking for mechanics. I'm looking for an auto shop nearby. There's one, and it's really not that far away. We're at Wendy's, and there it is. It's just right there on the map. I'm like, okay, give it a call. Busy signal. And I think, well, that's kind of a good sign, right? Like you want your mechanic to be as busy, right? Like you don't want him to just be available and just waiting for someone to show up. And so I'm like, oh, okay, well, I look again. I'm like, okay, wait, there's another shop. It's in the middle of a field. But I'm like, it's close. It's a little bit further than the first one I called, but it's right there. So I give it a call. It rings a few times. Up picks a lady, and her name is Shelley. Providence Lane, Providence. I talked to Shelley, and everything that I've told you, I've now explained to Shelley. We're trying to head home. This is what's going on with the car. And she says, okay, and she asked me what type of car I had, and I told her. And she says, we've worked on a couple of those. She said, did your oil light come on? And I'm like, no, it didn't come on. And she says, well, did your engine make a loud noise? I'm like, no, like it literally sounds and is running perfectly fine. It just has a blinking check engine light and won't let me get above a certain mile per hour. And she says, She says, sometimes those things are known for blowing bearings in their engine. She says, if you can get it to us, maybe we can diagnose it. We're very busy today, but if you can get here, we'll try to work in. We'll try to take a look at your engine. So, okay, we have a game plan. I back up, and guess what light starts to flicker? The oil light faintly flickered for just a few seconds and then went away. The oil light never came back on again, but it flickered right there. That was the first time I realized Shelley knows her stuff. Shelley knows what she's talking about. Providence. We start driving and following, because she told me directions on how to get there. I didn't listen because I have Google Maps, and there it was. I know where it goes. We're driving, we're following Google Maps, and we drive right past it. Shelley's auto garage, and it's not Shelley's, it's her family's, but the garage is not in the middle of the field like Google Maps said it was. It's 2 miles down the road, which feels like an eternity when your car's check engine light is flashing on you. But we finally get to the garage. We pull in, again, still raining. And get in, I start talking to Shelley, and Shelley says, we've got a young mechanic, his name's Brandon, he's working on something right now, but as soon as he can get to it, we'll look at it, we'll diagnose it, we'll see what's going on. And honestly, I don't even know that we waited 5 minutes. I don't even know that we waited 5 minutes before Brandon had wrapped up his project and started looking at our car. And I think by the time he started looking at it and diagnosing it, maybe we'd been there half an hour. Not really long at all in the grand scheme of things. And Brandon comes back with the news. And he says, well, I hooked it up to the code reader and see what was going on. And he said, sometimes it will say a misfire, or sometimes it will say low oil pressure, or a sensor malfunction. He said, I hooked it up, and your code says, replace engine. The only code that threw in that car that day. Replace engine. We're 7 hours from home. Almost 500 miles on this rainy Friday morning, now going into the afternoon. Brandon's like, I'm still going to work on it. I'm going to see what I can do. He went back out, and he continued to work on it to see if maybe he could get it out of what I now know is safety mode. The car's trying to protect itself, and the engine's trying to protect itself. That's why it wouldn't let me drive 70-plus miles down the interstate. And we sit there with Shelley. Providence, Aubrey. Providence. Because Shelley will have none of it that we're stranded 7 hours from home. As she's talking to Jen and I, the kids are in her office for periods of time, and Shelley picks up the phone and starts calling rental car places for us. As she says, we got to get a hold of the Enterprise in the neighboring town. You see, Ferdinand's not big enough to have an Enterprise, a rental car store, but 20 minutes down the road, in the bigger city, they've got a rental car place. I was like, oh, that sounds familiar, Neosho to Joplin. That's how it goes. But she's calling, and she's on the phone with Enterprise, and she's saying, I need to make sure you have a rental car there, because the last time I sent someone down there, they showed up and there was no car there. You've got a rental car there. And they're like, yes, ma'am, yes, you're talking, we are here, we're there. We've got more than one for them to pick from when they get here. We have them a car. Shelley's like, okay, good. Hangs up. She then starts talking to Brandon. She's like, Brandon, we've made you a sandwich, go eat lunch, and after lunch, come back here. And Brandon's like, I don't need a sandwich, I'm good, what's going on? And she says, Brandon, go get one of the cars. Go get one of the cars that's here, go get one of our cars. And she says, I need you to take this family 20 miles down the road to get their rental car. And that's what we do. We load up with 19-year-old Brandon. Found out he just graduated high school last year. He's been working at the mechanic shop 2 years. And now he's driving us during his missed lunch break 20 miles down the road in the rain so we can go get a rental car. Providence, Nash. Providence. We're driving along. We're almost there. And I just stop and I look at Brandon. I say, Brandon, I have to ask you a question. I said, Brandon, are you a believer? That's an awkward question to ask and to a perfect stranger in 2023. But I had to ask. I had to know. And after some brief shock, but then a smile and a laugh, he says, yes, I believe in Jesus. And I said, I thought so. I said, Brandon, is Shelley a believer too? And he says, well, I think so. I think she's Catholic. And I'm like, yep, she's a believer. Okay, she believes in Jesus too. 2 believers. Ferdinand, Indiana. 7 hours away from home on a route that we shouldn't have been on. Providence. The protective care of God. Jesus says in John 13:34, Jesus says, there's a new command I give you. Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. What's interesting is when he says this, shortly after he washes his disciples' feet, he's about to be taken and tried and crucified. And some of his last words, a new command I give you, love one another. Love one another. You see, the old commands that the Jewish people would know right away, right off the top of their head, their old commands were this. A rich young ruler, a rich young man, comes and asks Jesus, what commands do I need to follow to have eternal life? And Jesus replied, you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not give false testimony. Honor your father and mother, and love your neighbor as yourself. 3 chapters later, in Matthew 22, Jesus again says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All of the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. All of the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. Love God, love people. Love your neighbor as yourself. We see in other books of the New Testament, we see Paul write to the Romans and the Galatians, whatever other command there may be, they're summed up in this one. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. Same thing in Galatians. The entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love one another. Peter phrases it a little differently. Now that you've been purified, now that you've purified yourselves by obeying the truth so that you have the sincere love for each other, love one another deeply from the heart. And we started in John's gospel testimony where Jesus says, a new command I give you, love one another. We come back to John. Because then John says, dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. I've told you my story. I've summed it up with love one another, but also providence, that protective care of God. And you may be sitting here and you may be thinking, well, that's nice. You ran into a couple of Christians 7 hours from home. But I've saved what I think is the most amazing part of the story for right now. Because not only did Brandon give up his lunch and drive my family to a rental car store, I tried to tip him, and he wouldn't let me tip him. Not only did Brandon go out of his way to help us, when his log was full for the day, he had an agenda packed solid. Shelly helped us find a rental car and made sure when we got there it wasn't going to happen again, that the car would be gone. She made sure. But in that meantime, Shelly had all of our vehicle information, and she'd been calling Kia dealerships. The closest Kia dealership to Ferdinand, Indiana is in Evansville, over an hour away. But she's on the phone with the Kia dealership. She's giving them our vehicle identification number. She's giving them our make or model. She has our information. And she had told us before we left, she says, we've had a couple of customers who Kia replaced the engine for free. And no, it's a 10-year-old car, 157,000 miles, like, I'm from the show me state. No. Shelly's on the phone. The dealership said, if what you're diagnosing it's correct, get it here. If we can diagnose it, we'll see if we can replace the engine. I'd been on the phone trying to figure out how we were going to tow a vehicle 7 hours from Ferdinand, Indiana, and she says, we can help you tow it. We'll get it to Evansville. In church, 2 weeks from the day that we got it, Shelly helped us get it to Evansville. Kia diagnosed that Shelly was right, the engine threw bearings. She diagnosed that over the first phone call. It was completely covered under warranty. And within 2 weeks, not only did they diagnose it and order the engine arrived. And 2 weeks to the day, I'm speaking to the dealership because they said they'd call me in 2 weeks to let me know what was going on. 2 weeks to the day, the man's over here, he's like, yeah, I'm watching your engine get put in right now. 2 weeks to the day. My inner circle, when I speak of providence and the protective care of God, my inner circle, the friends I would have talked to about this, none of them knew or would have said, maybe Kia will replace that engine for you for free. I have a lot of car people in my circle. I'm not one, that's why I need them in my circle. They're amazed. They're amazed. Let us love one another, for love comes from God, and everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. This was Shelly, loving a perfect stranger who ruined her Friday morning, took up her lunch into her afternoon. She showed us God's love. She loved us like neighbors. She loved us like family. And Shelly just knew, a couple of other people we helped, other car, they'll replace the engine. I thought, Shelly, it was too good to be true. I was like, that can't be true. That's not right, Shelly. It's true. Shelly knew. Shelly knew. Today, if you're sitting here, you're hearing this story, and if you've not decided to follow Jesus, if you haven't given your life to him, these 2 verses that follow those 2 I just read are for you today. This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him, which is Jesus. And this is love. Not that we loved God, but that God loved us and sent his Son, Jesus, as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. If you haven't followed Jesus, these are the verses you need to know. There's no better day than right now to be baptized. It's beautiful. The water's ready. If you have followed Jesus, I think John gives us this message. Again, he said dear friends earlier, and he says it again. Dear friends, that means us, brothers and sisters and followers of Christ. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. Going back to John's gospel, Jesus says, the world will know you are my disciples by our love. If you're sitting here today, and maybe we haven't really loved one another like we ought to. Maybe you're sitting here right now, you're like, it's hard. I've been hurt. How am I supposed to love them? We go back to this verse. We love them because God so loved us. Love one another. Graduates, seniors, church, my message today, other than I will point out providence every time I see it now. My message to you today is love one another. What the world needs now is love. Jesus' love. If this congregation can help in any way, please come forward now as we stand and as we sing.